When we speak of success, growth, or even joy, it usually starts with something as mundane yet potent as a habit. How we begin our days determines the direction of the rest of them. It's similar to establishing the rhythm for an entire orchestra. If the start is in rhythm, the rest usually remains so. For me, mornings have always had a kind of magic. There's silence, stillness, and the promise of fresh starts that whisper, "You get another chance today." But let's get real. Most of us don't love mornings. We roll over, we check our phones, we gulp down a bowl of cereal, and before we know it, half of the day is gone. That's precisely the reason why I was eager to know what is so special about morning routines, particularly for individuals like Dwayne, "The Rock" Johnson, someone who is famous not just for his physique, but for his unparalleled discipline, energy, and positivity. The Rock's life is an example of persistence and hard work. He doesn't wake up early simply because it's cool. He does it because it provides him with control over his time, his concentration, and ultimately his life. And that really inspired me on a deep level. So I chose to put myself in his shoes, figuratively at least, for a few days, and see what it would be like to live that sort of discipline from the second the alarm sounds. When my alarm woke me up the first time at 4 a.m., I won't lie, I didn't leap from bed grinning. It was dark, still, and all of me wished to sleep again. And yet, something within provoked me. This is where transformation starts. Growth doesn't come packaged in ease, it comes dressed as a test. I understood that waking up early wasn't simply a matter of time. It was about conquering your mind. Every day was a little battle between the convenient option and the correct option. And every morning I decided to get up rather than sleep. I was already conquering before the sun rose. Something deeply spiritual about waking up those early hours. When the rest of the world is still sleeping, you are able to greet yourself in silence. No notifications, no distractions, no noise. Just you and your thoughts. I started to see why so many successful individuals guard their mornings like holy time. It is the one time of day when you can really be deliberate. When you get to choose who you want to be before the world beats that choice out of you. What hit me most from this experiment wasn't so much how much I was able to accomplish in a day, but how differently I was thinking about myself. Getting up early made me feel a sense of power, and power creates confidence. I began to understand that success isn't necessarily about grand achievements. It's about small accomplishments done every single day. It's not about perfection. It's about getting up, even when you don't want to. As I persisted with this habit, I started to find that those early mornings had an energy of focus and clarity. I felt sharper mentally, calmer emotionally. I wasn't responding to life, I was designing it. And maybe that's what The Rock and so many others have gotten good at. Not merely waking up early, but waking up with intention. You see, routines aren't meant to trap us, they're meant to free us. They give structure to our chaos and rhythm to our dreams. I realized that a morning routine is not about copying someone else's schedule. It's about learning the discipline behind it, the mindset that drives it. It's about building a foundation that supports your own journey. So yes, waking up at 4 a.m. was hard. There were times my body was weary, but my spirit was full. For every dawn I saw kept me in mind of the fact that no matter how yesterday appeared, today is a new opportunity to start over. And that, I think, is the crux of growth, being present for yourself, day after day, until the phenomenal becomes normal. When I made the decision to experiment with The Rock's morning routine, it wasn't out of interest or to see how much I could push myself. It was about knowing what compels a person to live up to such a phenomenal amount of discipline each and every day. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is not only an athlete or an actor, he's an icon of hard work, consistency, and indomitable positivity. His rags to riches story from wrestling arenas to Hollywood success is not only motivating, It's evidence that success is founded upon habits, not chance. So, I wondered what happens when we take the habits of someone who doesn't allow excuses to get the best of him. What occurs when we enter the world of someone who wakes up each day with intention, appreciation, and unrelenting energy? There is something alluring about The Rock's life. He's not exercising for fitness's sake alone. He's conditioning his mind as much as his body. His day starts before dawn with perspiration, concentration, and a silent vow to himself to be there, come what may. I wanted to know what goes on in his mind. I wanted to experience what it's like to wake up before the world, silence the noise, and dedicate those first holy hours to getting stronger. Not physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. When I first saw his morning videos and interviews, one quote lingered: "Be the hardest worker in the room." That one sentence is full of meaning. It's not competition, it's commitment. It's staying so committed to your own improvement that you don't have time to compare yourself to others. The Rock's regimen isn't glamorous. It's naked, intense, and hard-hitting. And that's what appealed to me. Because improvement doesn't come packaged with comfort or convenience. It's forged in times when nobody's looking, when there's only you, your effort, and your willpower. As I started observing his morning routine, I knew his success did not come overnight. It was a product of years of showing up with consistency and passion. His mornings are not merely about weights lifting. They're about lifting his mentality to a new level. Every rep, every step, every choice is an expression of dedication to being better than he was yesterday. That was what motivated me. Because if a human being is able to direct that amount of discipline to their mornings, just think of what that does to the rest of their day. It wasn't about mimicking The Rock's routine, it was about changing. I didn't want to be him, I wanted to take from him. I wanted to learn how that kind of discipline could affect my own life, how form could generate liberty, and how beginning the day with purpose could recondition the rest of my hours. I wanted to try the thesis that greatness isn't something you happen upon. It's something you create, one morning at a time. And as I adhered to his routine, I started grasping something more profound. The Rock wakes up early not because he must, but because he can. That's the kind of mindset that shifts everything. When you begin your day with gratitude, not obligation, the world looks different. You're not pursuing success, you're constructing it from the inside out. What I was most inspired by in The Rock's daily routine wasn't the physical toughness. It was the mental toughness behind it. The serenity in the face of impending chaos. The determination to get up when it is more convenient to lie down. The humility to continue getting better, even after you've come so far. It was the reminder that success isn't what you do. It's who you become in the process. So when I adopted The Rock's regimen, it was not merely a challenge. It was a dialogue with myself. A call to remind us all that we harbor that inner strength, that soft power just waiting to be stirred. And sometimes all it takes is one courageous morning to begin to find it. When the 400 a.m. alarm blared for the initial time, it sounded like the world's own screaming sound. My body fought back, my mind bargained, and my heart pleaded, perhaps just 5 more minutes. But then I recalled what I was doing this for. I wasn't attempting to mimic The Rock's regimen. I was attempting to find my own strength. That initial moment, when you opt to stand up rather than roll over into convenience, is where growth really starts. It's a quiet but powerful decision that says, I'm in control of my day. The first few mornings were the hardest. Waking up before the sun feels almost unnatural at first. The world outside is dark and still, and it almost feels like time itself hasn't started yet. But within that quietness, there's something deep. A feeling of possession, a feeling that you've been gifted additional hours that are yours alone. I came to understand that this was the key to The Rock's 4 a.m. wake-up time. It's not merely about getting up early, It's about making room for discipline, contemplation, and self-control before the world begins demanding things. There's a profound psychological transformation that occurs when you wake up that early. You become less reactive and more proactive. Most individuals get to spend their mornings reacting to messages, to alerts, to tasks. But when you begin your day at 4 a.m., there's nobody and nothing to reply to. You just have yourself, your thoughts, and your intention. The quietness becomes your mentor. It helps you tune in to your inner voice, that inner push that gets lost beneath the din of everyday life. Sure, some days my body was tired, and I wondered if it was really worth it. The temptation to stay in bed was great, especially when the bed was warmer than my enthusiasm. But every time I coerced myself out of bed, I learned that the most difficult part was never the routine or the workout. It was conquering that small battle with comfort. Once you're up, the rest comes easily. That morning victory provided me with momentum, confidence, and an odd sense of pride that I carried on through the hours that followed. As I kept waking up early, I began to notice internal shifts in my attitude. My days felt longer, not due to time, but due to presence. I wasn't hurrying anymore. I was pioneering. I began to notice how much of life we lose just because we begin our days late. Not just in hours, but in vigilance. The stillness of morning permitted me to be rational, to anticipate with purpose, and to begin with thanks rather than anxiety. The Rock always talks about how champions are created in the early morning hours, and I know why now. There's power in knowing you've already accomplished something challenging before the world wakes up. It shifts your perception of yourself. You start to respect your own effort, and that respect rubs off on everything you do. Whether it's work, relationships, or personal objectives, that discipline is part of who you are. Rising early also taught me something lovely about patience. Development doesn't make a big noise. It works silently, day after day. There were days when I didn't feel any different, but gradually I understood that I had become stronger. Not only physically, but mentally and emotionally. I was no longer waiting for the day to begin. I was the one who was beginning it. And perhaps that's the true lesson behind the Rock's 4 a.m. routine. It's not perfection, it's presence. It's being present for yourself before you're present for the world. Because when you can own the morning, you can own anything. The sun might rise the same for all of us, but the way you decide to welcome it in, that is what is different. Working for the Rock, the first thing I think of is his unbelievable physical power. The type of power built up over years of dedication rather than cutting corners. But as I started keeping pace with his morning schedule, I understood something profound. The true strength is not in the muscles, but in the mind. The gym, the weights, the sweat, they're not merely physical tests, but studies in discipline, concentration, and mental stamina. Each bead of sweat has a tale of perseverance, of overcoming boundaries that were once unimaginable. At my first morning exercise, I was there, sleepy-eyed and aching. Looking at the weights, my excuses filled my head. You're exhausted. You don't have to try so hard. Perhaps tomorrow. But then I thought about how the Rock is always saying, focus on being the hardest worker in the room. That line stuck with me, and I thought, the hardest worker isn't necessarily the strongest. It's the one who doesn't give up. So I grabbed those weights, not to make anyone proud, but to remind myself that I could. And as the days went by, I started to feel the deeper relationship between fitness and mentality. Each repetition wasn't merely creating muscle. It was creating confidence. Each set wasn't about appearing strong. It was about being strong. The ache in my arms, the burn in my legs, they began to feel like evidence of growth. I discovered the body reacts to routine, yet the mind is reshaped by adversity. And it's when you're most exhausted, when you want to quit, that you realize your ultimate strength. The gym was no longer somewhere to exercise, it was my haven. It was where I set aside excuses, uncertainties, and apprehensions. In that inner concentration, I had a peace that surprised me. There is something close to meditative in testing your body to its limit. The breathing rhythm, the heartbeat, the attention to form, all of it becomes a moving prayer of thankfulness. Thankfulness for the strength you possess, for the movement you are making, for the fact that you can even show up. I also came to understand that fitness has a strong connection to emotional strength. When you push your body, you condition your mind to remain level-headed in the face of adversity. You begin to think that if you can endure this pain, this exhaustion, this discomfort, you can endure anything life brings your way. That's the real value of fitness. It doesn't merely create stamina for the body. It creates stamina for the soul. The Rock's workout routine is famously intense, but it's not about punishment. It's about purpose. It's about setting a standard for yourself and meeting it again and again. He trains not just to look good, but to feel grounded, to remind himself that hard work is a daily ritual, not a one-time effort. That's what inspired me most. Because in a world that's constantly chasing comfort, choosing discomfort becomes a superpower. There were days when I was tired, when I didn't have the strength, when my body told me to stop. But my mind said, "Go on." And in those words, I discovered my power. I understood that there's power that lies within. You're not strong because of how big your muscles are. You're strong because of the size of your will. And that's what this journey taught me. Fitness isn't perfection, it's progress. It's not about lifting heavy, but about showing up consistently. It's the small wins. One more rep, one more step, one more moment of bravery. Because every time you test your limit, you build your definition of what is possible. During those morning exercises, I was not only working out my body, I was working out my heart. I was discovering how to quiet fear, accept struggle, and rejoice in the journey. And gradually, I came to understand that true change does not take place in the mirror, but in the mind. There's an old adage that tells us motivation begins it, but discipline completes it. When I started the Rock's morning routine, I knew that in theory, but to live it, to actually live it, gave that saying a new dimension. Motivation is like a spark, it ignites you for the moment, but if you don't safeguard it with discipline, it vanishes. Discipline, however, is the burning flame that continues to burn even when the excuse, making winds attempt to extinguish it. Motivation was my motivation in the first few days. I was inspired, excited, and eager to know what would occur. But as weeks grew from days, excitement began to fade away. The 4 a.m. wake-up call was no longer empowering. It became merciless. My body hurt, my mind was fatigued, and that soft voice of reassurance just grew louder. It was in those moments that I understood that motivation is a feeling, but that discipline is a choice. It's not about how you're feeling. It's about what you're going to do anyway, no matter how you're feeling. Discipline was my quiet friend. It didn't encourage me. It didn't vow speedy outcomes, but it arrived unobtrusively and steadily. It was present when my enthusiasm lagged, when my willpower faltered, and when my motivation vanished altogether. And that's when I began to see why the Rock frequently touts discipline as the pillar of achievement. He doesn't count on being inspired daily. He counts on the vow he made to himself to continue no matter what. I realized that discipline is a form of self-respect. It's the pledge you make to yourself to see it through, even when nobody's looking. It's getting up early, not because you want to, but because you promised. It's taking the tough road because it goes somewhere. Each time I dragged myself out of bed, each time I grunted through another exercise, I was showing myself that my promise is important, that my work isn't going to be in vain, and that my objectives are worth enduring. And somewhere, discipline ceased to be a chore. It became liberating. There's this weird peace that you get from knowing you're able to count on yourself. that you don't need the right mood or optimal time. You just do it. You do what you're supposed to do. The Rock's life is that proof so strongly. His success isn't founded on flashes of genius, it's founded on day in, day out discipline, the kind most people can't see. The 4 a.m. alarms, the silent hours in the gym, the diligent work when nobody's applauding. That's where it gets made. Discipline also showed me the value of delayed gratification. We have a culture that emphasizes immediate payoffs, rapid success, instant accolades, effortless rewards. But genuine fulfillment comes with time. It requires patience and persistence. There were times when I didn't see anything happening, when I wondered if it was even working. But each day I appeared. I was sowing seeds of strength, focus, and resilience. And eventually those seeds began to germinate. What amazed me the most was how discipline seeped into every other part of my life. I became more intentional, more organized, more focused. I didn't merely master my mornings. I began to master my thoughts, my emotions, my responses. I saw that discipline doesn't merely create habits, it creates character. It's not simply about doing difficult things. It's about becoming the kind of person who perseveres. There's a quiet assurance that results from living with discipline. You don't have to tell anyone. You don't need external approval. You just know who you are and what you're capable of. That's what the Rock represents. And that's what I learned from this experience. Motivation can begin the process, but it's discipline that completes it. And perhaps that's the most important lesson of all. You don't need to be ready to begin. You only have to begin. Because when you learn discipline, you no longer pursue motivation, you are power itself. As I look back on those morning hours, one thing became remarkably apparent. Regardless of how great your mindset is, your body requires fuel. The Rock's morning ritual isn't about getting up early or lifting weights. It's about balance, nourishing the body and the mind in a manner that will fuel throughout the day. Enter nutrition. I soon understood that to keep up with even a small percentage of the Rock's energy, I couldn't pay attention to what I was consuming. Prior to this experiment, I never thought much about how deeply food affects not only your physical strength but your concentration, moods, and work capacity. But when you wake up at 4 a.m., your body requires more than willpower and caffeine. It craves fuel. The Rock's diet is notoriously strict: lean proteins, complex carbohydrates, healthy fats, and plenty of water. He eats intentionally, not for pleasure, and that attitude in itself shifted my perception about food. Initially, the organized meal seemed to be a task. Preparation, planning, and adhering to clean eating while managing everything else in life seemed too much. But eventually, I started looking at it differently, as a self-care activity. Every healthy meal wasn't deprivation. It was a reminder I cared about my energy, my concentration, and my development. Food became fuel, not distraction or comfort. And that subtle change revolutionized my days. I wasn't pursuing energy anymore. I was creating it. When your body is well nourished, your brain begins to clarify. I saw I could think more clearly, concentrate longer, and even feel emotionally more stable. My exercises grew stronger, and the exhaustion that had weighed me down began to disappear. It was as if my body was rewarding me for listening to it at last. I saw the reason why the Rock mentions balance all the time. It is not physical strength alone. It is about establishing harmony between what you intake and what you output. But nutrition isn't simply about eating correctly. It's also about consistency. There were days when I woke up and I was tempted not to eat breakfast, to just grab something fast and go. But I realized that missing the basics creates imbalance. Just as discipline makes you mentally sharp, a healthy diet makes your body stable. You can't pour from an empty cup, and you can't play at your best when you're running on fumes. I also began paying attention to how mindful eating impacted my mood. When you eat mindfully, selecting food that nourishes you rather than depletes you, It becomes an act of self-respect. I began feeling more in tune with my own body. I began listening when it was hungry, when it needed rest, when it needed water. That attunement created a more profound kind of discipline, not one of control, but of care. And naturally, hydration was a large component of it. The rock consumes gallons of water daily, and although I wasn't quite able to keep up with him, I made a genuine attempt. Being hydrated felt like a modest but potent act of rebirth. Every sip was like filling up the tank that propelled me. It was a reminder that growth isn't always about dramatic events. Sometimes it's about the humble, steady decisions that accumulate power in the long run. My favorite thing about this section of the trip was how nutrition came to reflect all the other things I was learning. Like discipline. It's not perfection, it's intention. It's seeing that the decisions you make day after day, even the tiny ones, create the groundwork for who you are. Through this phase, I came to see that food, as with all things in life, is energy. And when you select the proper kind, healing foods, nourishing foods, and empowering foods, you're not merely eating to feed your body, you're eating to feed your purpose. That's what the rock's philosophy is all about. It's not purely physical strength, it's whole person strength, aligning your habits, your health, and your heart with a version of yourself that can't be stopped. There's something really remarkable about the quiet hours that precede the dawn. That silence when it's only you, your thoughts, and the soft hum of potential in the air. As I walked myself through the rock's morning routine, I started to see that what makes the rock's mornings truly special isn't so much the physical training or the routine. It's the state of mind behind it. The rock frequently speaks about being grounded, about beginning his day clear and thankful, and I realized why only when I myself attempted it. There in those early morning hours following the exercise and before the din of the day started, I created room for mindfulness. It wasn't meditation per se, but being present to my thoughts, my body, and my mission. I would spend a few quiet moments just breathing, to think about the day that was going to unfold, and to remind myself how lucky I was to have another opportunity to attempt, to learn, and to live with purpose. It is incredible how something as mundane as gratitude can change the whole vibe of your day. At first, it was weird, sitting there quietly while the world slept, attempting to notice my breath and my blessings. But eventually, I could see how much power this little action held. Gratitude has a way of making even the roughest mornings. It draws your attention away from what isn't there and refocuses it on what is. I started to feel grateful not only for the positives but for the difficulties. The early mornings, the aching, the struggle, because they were making me stronger, more concentrated, and more patient. Mindfulness isn't all about peace, I learned. It's about awareness. If you begin your day with mindfulness, you no longer live on autopilot. You become intentional with your time, your emotions, and your actions. It's like hitting a mental reset button before stepping into the chaos of the day. The rock's routine is a perfect example of this. His mornings are structured, but they're also sacred. He doesn't just train his body, he centers his mind. And that's what keeps him grounded no matter how fast life moves. One of the most stunning things I discovered along the way is that gratitude is fuel, emotional fuel. It adds meaning to effort. It makes struggle purpose and routine bliss. When you start the day with gratitude, you start to see everything differently. The workout isn't a chore, it's a privilege. The early wake up isn't a sacrifice, it's a privilege. Even the exhaustion feels like evidence that you're working towards something worthwhile. There were mornings where I'd stand outside as the sun was rising, and for a second I'd just observe. The golden light that caressed the world seemed like a gentle reminder that each day is a new start, a new opportunity to be what you want to be. And in those still moments, I felt connected, not only to my aspirations, but to existence itself. That's what mindfulness does. It brings you together. It returns you to yourself. The rock constantly states that gratitude makes him humble and grounded, and now I see why. When you cultivate gratitude every day, you cease to pursue happiness. You begin to build it. You learn how to find harmony even in the midst of hard labor. You cease to seek balance outside of yourself and begin building it from the inside out. That, to me, is really what growth is. Not necessarily getting stronger or more successful, but wiser, kinder, more grateful. At the conclusion of this portion of the routine, I had found my mornings entirely transformed. They were no longer reactive or rushed. They were intentional. I wasn't merely getting through tasks. I was living them. Each rep, each breath, each second became a miniature meditation on life itself. And that's something I will take with me well beyond this experiment. The knowledge that mindfulness and gratitude are not morning mantras. They are lifetime friends. The most surprising thing I learned while living out the rock's morning routine was how profoundly it realigned my perception of time. Prior to this experiment, I used to feel as if the hours just passed quicker than I could keep up with them. Mornings merged into afternoons, and days left with me thinking that I had not gotten anything done. But waking up at 4 a.m. completely turned my world around. It was like I had opened a hidden door to extra time, time that all belonged to me. That early wake, up time, didn't simply provide additional hours to my day. It multiplied my concentration, my presence, and my sense of purpose. The rock's time discipline is almost mythical. Each minute of his day has purpose to it. He doesn't wake up early merely to boast about productivity. He does it to make room for clarity. Seeing that building motivated me to apply the same level of accuracy to my own daily routine. I began scheduling my mornings minute by minute, from waking up, through the workout, to the moments of reflection and gratitude. Not about doing it perfectly, but about preparing for it. Because when you decide how your day starts, you decide how it continues. With focus came time management. I saw that the morning hours of quiet had a different quality of energy. One without distractions, notifications, and the clamor of the world. That silence was my biggest strength. I discovered that I could give those hours to what mattered most. My goals. My writing, my inner work. By the time the rest of the world started waking up, I was already centered, anchored, and ahead of the day. That feeling of concentration was new to me. It wasn't all about scheduling, it was about attitude. Effective time management means attention management, being completely present in what you're doing. I discovered that multitasking is not a mark of honor. It's a sign of mediocrity. The rock's capacity to devote his entire energy to each aspect of his day, his exercises, his job, his family, is born from this intense concentration. He's not merely hectic, he's deliberate. And that's what I wanted to live out. There were times when I found myself slipping, scrolling on my phone longer than I had intended, losing time in distractions. But rather than being harsh with myself, I started viewing those moments as reminders. Each lost minute was a moment I could have used on growth. Gradually, I started to construct boundaries around my time, learning to say no to that which did not benefit me, and yes to what mattered. And with each passing day, that focus intensified. One of the most important realizations I made was that time is not the enemy. It's the mirror. It shows us what we value most. If we spend it on distractions, we get lost. But if we spend it on purpose, even a few hours can seem endless. That's what I learned from the Rock's regimen. It's not about how many hours you have, but how deliberately you use them. I began to notice that as my mornings became routine, the rest of my day followed suit. I was more productive, yes, but so was I more at peace. I wasn't rushing anymore. I was flowing. The more control I had over my time, the freer I felt. It's a paradox, but one so beautiful. Discipline brings about freedom, And maybe the greatest lesson of all: focus isn't something you discover, it's something you discipline. Every time you decide to remain committed, to dedicate yourself fully to a single task, you build that mental muscle. And that focus doesn't only make you more productive, it makes you more present, more patient, and more powerful. By the end of this phase, I knew that time management isn't efficient, it's respect. Respect for your dreams, your goals, and your life. The Rock's daily routine taught me that if you treat your time like gold, you begin living like it's important. Each moment counts. And once you learn that, time can no longer dominate you. You're in charge. Nothing, however inspirational it sounds initially, is ever easy. Transformation never is. It's painful, it's messy, and it is always pushing your patience to the limit. Following the Rock's morning regimen was no different. I encountered battles that were far greater than physical fatigue alone. There were mental skirmishes, emotional conflicts, and times when I wondered how I'd continue. But in those struggles, I learned lessons that changed my perceptions of myself, my boundaries, and life in general. Fatigue was the first and most glaring challenge. Waking up at 4 a.m. daily was not glamorous, it was brutal. My body had to adjust, and there were mornings when my eyelids weighed more than the weights I was supposed to lift. Sleep deprivation pushed my discipline harder than anything. But I realized soon enough that the fatigue was not just physical. It was also resistance in the mind. As soon as I quit resisting and acknowledged the pain as a part of the process, things started getting easier gradually. Usually, growth starts the moment you quit fleeing from struggle and begin learning from it. Next, consistency was the challenge. It's simple to be excited on day 1, perhaps even on day 2, but when the thrill wears off and all that remains is routine, that is when the real work starts. There were times when I didn't want to get out of bed, days when I just wanted to skip going to the gym, days when I just wanted to revert back to normal. But I realized that consistency is not about being perfect daily. It is about showing up, even imperfectly. Some mornings I was not as strong or concentrated, but I showed up, and that was enough. I discovered that progress lies within persistence. Balance was another challenge. Attempting to integrate the Rock's grueling schedule with my own was at times overwhelming. Between work obligations and personal commitments, it became difficult to keep up. But that challenge helped me learn the importance of prioritization, the skill of prioritizing what is most important. I began to realize that you can't do everything, but you can do the right things. And that mindset change made a huge difference. There was also an emotional test, the silent type that sneaks in when you begin comparing yourself to others. Seeing someone like The Rock and then checking your own journey could be discouraging at times. I caught myself thinking, I'm not even close. And that's when I remembered why I embarked on this journey. Not to become The Rock, but to be a better version of me. The moment I lost the habit of comparing and gained the appreciation of my own work, I was at peace with the process. Maybe the most potent thing I learned was that growth isn't linear. On some days you'll feel invincible, and on others, you'll feel like you're starting from scratch. But every step, even the tenuous, uncertain ones, matters. The hard mornings, the wars in your head, the setbacks, they're all part of your becoming. I started to realize the ritual wasn't beating me down. It was putting me back together, piece by piece. There were lovely lessons concealed in those struggles too. I discovered that discipline and compassion go hand in hand. You can challenge yourself to be better, yet be kind to yourself too. I discovered that rest is not weakness. It is strength. And most importantly, I discovered that perseverance is not about never falling. It is about never staying down. By the time I finished this journey, the struggles that at first seemed insurmountable became my instructors. They taught me patience, strength, humility, and faith in my capacity to learn. The Rocks regimen wasn't just a fitness regimen, it was a character regimen. It made me confront my excuses, push past my limits, and find a strength I never knew I possessed. In reflection, I now understand that each obstacle bore a message: nothing good comes easily. But anything good is within your grasp if you persist. The hurt goes away, the exhaustion wears off. But pride at having not given up, that is forever. Several weeks after completing my experience with the Rock's morning routine, I had an epiphany. It was never so much about becoming the Rock. It was about being me, but stronger, clearer, and more deliberate. Attempting his routine wasn't a test to emulate his life. It was an opportunity to learn what discipline, purpose, and balance really are. And maybe the most significant thing that I learned from it all was this: growth is not achieved through imitation. Growth is achieved through integration. What inspires you from someone else, but you mold it into something that is your own rhythm. I had assumed initially that this experience would merely teach me how to wake up early, eat clean, and work hard. But it turned into something richer, a reflection of my strengths, my weaknesses, and my potential. I came to understand that although the Rock's regimen served perfectly for him, real growth occurs when you make what you learn fit your own life, your own energy, and your own objectives. What is strong isn't his 4 a.m. wake-up call, it's the self-discipline. What's inspiring isn't his workouts, it's the consistency with which he shows up. The truth is, we don't need to live someone else's version of success to create our own. We just need to learn from the principles behind it. Dedication, gratitude, and focus, and make them our own. You don't need to wake up earlier than the sun rises to be successful, but you do need to wake up with a purpose. You don't need to obey another person's timetable, but you must obey your own aspirations with the same passion and belief. On this journey, I learned that growth is incredibly individual. What might work for one person won't necessarily work for the next, and that's a good thing. The objective isn't perfection, it's movement. It's about embracing that delicate balance between discipline and kindness. It's about tuning into your body, honoring your boundaries, and yet still showing up with grit. The Rock's regimen showed me to appreciate each morning, not only as a new day, but as a new possibility, a new opportunity to show up for myself in some way that matters. When you draw inspiration from others, the most important thing is not to get lost in their journey, but to use it to make your own stronger. I discovered that success doesn't have a single recipe. It has many, all penned by people courageous enough to keep showing up. And whereas the Rock's discipline might resemble waking up early and yelling at the gym, yours could resemble keeping a daily journal, meditating, reading, being creative, or even loving your family to the nth degree with unbreakable devotion. Most importantly is simply showing up day after day on purpose and entirely. This journey helped me understand that true transformation happens when you stop waiting for the perfect plan and start taking imperfect action. You learn, you adjust, and you grow. Each small step adds up. Each early morning, each healthy choice, each moment of mindfulness becomes a brick in the foundation of the life you're building. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all. That growth is not about becoming somebody else. It's about becoming the best version of you. The Rock's regimen forced me out of my comfort zone, but it also taught me that balance is equal to hustle. You can be tough and tender, driven and thankful, disciplined and compassionate simultaneously. So, if you ever do decide to attempt a routine like this, don't do it to compare yourself. Do it to test yourself. Do it to reach the person you can be if you put an end to doubting and started doing instead. Because when it all comes down to it, it's not about when you wake up. It's about why you wake up. It starts when you leave chasing others' trails and begin building yours. The Rock's habit showed me what consistency and love can do. But the loveliest piece of this process was learning every morning, whenever it arrives, is another opportunity to rise, not like the rock, but like you.